Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this March 2nd, 2015 edition of Nightcast. Our opening story tonight, I'm happy to report that it appears events today in the United States with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has served to ease tensions regarding the situation between Israel and the United States regarding Iran. Ken Geddes explains in this opening report.
Benjamin Netanyahu came to Washington on a mission, he says, to guarantee Israel's future. He's getting an icy reception from the administration, but counting on warm applause in Congress, which invited him. At the annual conference of the pro-Israel lobby group AIPAC, a warm-up act by Mr. Netanyahu and an effort to diffuse tensions ahead of his speech in Congress.
My speech is not intended to show any disrespect to President Obama or the esteemed office that he holds. I have great respect for both.
Previous White House meetings were tense enough already without the high stakes of a nuclear deal in the balance. There will be no sit-down with President Obama this time. And the administration is trying to put the focus back on how much it has done to protect Israel.
The Obama administration has invested more than $20 billion in foreign military financing for Israel, far more than for any other country and more than at any previous time in the history of the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Dozens of Democrats are boycotting Mr. Netanyahu's speech, upset with his political maneuvering.
It is not true that he's speaking for all Jews. As a matter of fact, a majority of Israelis think that it's a mistake for him to be here. And I represent lots of people who are Jews, who are decidedly divided, but the majority that I've heard from don't agree with it.
But Mr. Netanyahu is undeterred. His lobbying mission in Washington will culminate here in this building in an address to Congress. He hasn't said very much yet about the case he plans to make against a nuclear deal with Iran. But this is all very much part of his strategy to try to undermine progress towards an agreement. And he will receive applause from those attending. Last time he spoke here, he got 28 standing ovations. And he will use those images again to look strong at home ahead of the Israeli elections. Global politics are also very local. Kim Rattas, BBC News, Washington.
You know, friends, in this world and world news reporting, I'm very thankful to the BBC for the coverage it does worldwide of things like nobody else can do on a worldwide basis. And yet, anytime anyone makes any kind of politicalness out of it, but, you know, the obstacle that men are against, whether they know it or whether it's done wittingly or unwittingly, there is a God of this world, whom the God of heaven, who created the universe, the earth, man upon it, allows the God of this world to continue on the throne of this world. Some of you know what I'm saying by that, understand that. Some don't. Some don't even believe there's a God of heaven, much less a God of this world, who is the old Lucifer turned Satan the devil because of his rebellion against his creator, like a Frankenstein monster who went up and tried to take over the seat and throne of the great God. And even though he doesn't have the powers of creation that the great God, our Father, the creator of the heavens, the universe, the earth, has, in spite of that, he felt he should be in charge and thought that he could beat up his creator, beat out his creator. He found out otherwise, and God threw him back down to this earth. And the great, powerful, merciful God, when he puts a man in power, he leaves them there until someone qualifies to replace him. And the first Adam who came failed in the effort to qualify to replace Satan on the throne of this earth. The second Adam, Jesus Christ, thankfully, who had been with the Father since the beginning, and the beginning, they are without beginning. They're spiritual, and it's something the mind of man just really cannot comprehend. Except things that are physical, they have to biogenesis. The law of biogenesis says physical things, physical life has to come from pre-existing life. And God the Father and Jesus Christ have life in themselves. Now, from the beginning, they weren't God the Father and Jesus Christ the Son. That happened later, but the two were together. John 1:1's the real beginning of the Bible, and it tells you there that the Word was with God from the beginning. In the beginning, the Word was God, and He was with God, and by and through the Word, everything that was created was created. I didn't mean to get into a long sermon, but yeah, one of the things we learned in Ambassador College, we learned under Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, the man God called out of this world to be the leader, his end-time apostle, to share truths with man, and more than that, to restore the truths that have been lost for centuries. And some of those were only to be revealed in the latter days. Daniel would have liked to have known what the prophecies that he was used to give, explaining the dreams in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 of King Nebuchadnezzar. And throughout the whole book of Daniel, Daniel 11, Daniel 12, those things that are prophesied there, Daniel told God, hey, what do these mean? And God told Daniel, go your way. Daniel, seal the book. These things are sealed until the last days. When are the last days, friends? God said those days would be a time when knowledge would be increased and when man would go to and fro, something that only happened within the last century, last 100 years, since the last century. Because we put in some new equipment, some new cameras, and I wanted to test them out. I just found out a couple of shots aren't working with the cameras. So I'll save that long-winded explanation for another time. I do want to point this out, though. There is a scripture that I wanted to point out that relates to the story that we were just covering with Mr. Netanyahu speaking in Washington before Congress tomorrow. That happens tomorrow. He spoke today and got in a thing to ease the tensions, and thankfully, as you just saw in the news report, it looks like that succeeded very well. But this verse from Isaiah 9, verse 21, I mentioned it last night. I didn't have the slide on the screen to put up for you. I want to bring it full forward tonight, and let's read this scripture together where it says, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Ephraim, Manasseh, and they together shall be against Judah. Now, some of you know what that means, and I don't need to explain it. Others of you who may be watching this program scratching your head and say, well, what in the world does that mean? Who in the world is Ephraim and Manasseh? And friends, if you don't understand who are the sons of Israel, and not only who they were, but who they are today, then you might want to go back and read Genesis 49, because there God explained through Jacob, as he's told his sons, where their offspring would be and what they would be like in the latter days. And he was speaking of our time today. And even though 10 of those sons became lost, many of you have heard about the lost 10 tribes of Israel. They were lost pretty much until these latter days. And God had prophesied through Jacob, as he told his sons, and it was recorded in Genesis 49, where they would be in the last days. And we know where they are now because those things that were prophesied explain. All you got to do is look at them and look at where are these people with these characteristics, and it becomes very evident. And the two sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, are the UK and Canada and the United States, respectively. And so this verse, when you understand that, this prophecy for the latter days, when you understand, okay, now we're talking about the United States and the UK, U.S., UK, and UK, U.S., and they together shall be against Judah. Now that's shall be is a future tense, and so this is a prophecy for the future. How future? Well, we're already beginning to see ripples of trouble and tensions where within the United States, even same inside of the UK, there have been news stories we've been reporting here during the past several months that show divisions in the UK that are against their brother Judah. Judah primarily today meaning the offspring of Israel in the Middle East, in the country that's called Israel. But eventually, this prophecy says that the United States and the UK together will be against Judah. Now, what's going to happen that's going to cause the two nations by and large? Is it something that President Obama will do? The great mercies of God and how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reflects that mercy of God as he spoke highly of his brethren in the United States, Brother Manasseh, and the government leaders of Manasseh. Even though, Manasseh actually means a blood son of Joseph, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. And our president is not of that bloodline. And so the United States, which is a land that was given by and large to Manasseh as a promise to Abraham, his son Isaac, and his son Jacob, and Jacob's sons, and Jacob's son Joseph, and specifically his son, Joseph's son Manasseh. That's who the United States is today. And that was a cultural promise. And so we have a stranger, as if it were ruling over us, who could care less about the promises made to the sons of Israel. And I say that because of his obvious doings and intentions that are obvious in the news. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he showed a high deal of respect toward his brother Manasseh and toward the stranger who is leading as the president over the country of Manasseh today. And yet I wonder if Mr. Netanyahu understood this prophecy in Isaiah. Would some in his country, Israel, some of the people of Judah, they perhaps understand and perceive that little in a certain way may come out of this other than ruffling the feathers of the president, who's got another nearly couple years in office, enough to give Israel a difficult time. And any further delay in stopping Iran, when you know what happened, and it surprises me, like I talked last night, friends, it surprises me how people can ignore the former advisor to the president of Iran getting on television in November of 2013, just a few days after the Geneva talks in November of 2013 between the P5+1 in the United States and Iran, and how people could act as if they never heard this, as if they never heard the former president, the former advisor to president of Iran saying that we fooled y'all. We have this uranium underground we didn't tell you about that's at a much higher percentage than that uranium we did tell you about. And that which we did tell you about, yeah, we agreed with your deal where you had that woman who grew up in Iran dealing for about a year before the Geneva talks with us and worked out and got us to agree that the deal was we'd get there and you'd get us to agree that we would lower that to a certain 3.9%, lower it by 20%, what you know about, what we told you about. And we're only in agreement to let you look into these certain places you know about. But we're not telling you about this other place we have. And we're not telling you about the level of uranium we have there. And they were on live Syrian television laughing about this just days after the Geneva talks. And friends, we were able to get a recording of that live broadcast with English subtitles. We played it in November 2013 here on Nightcast. You can go back to our archives, scan back to November 2013. You can watch that full, about a half-hour interview program where the former advisor to the president of Iran is explaining how they made fools out of the United States, out of the P5, how they have this uranium hidden underground, and how it's their intention and goal to destroy Israel and America along with it. He's sitting there openly saying this and other things against Israel and against the United States on live Syrian television just days after the Geneva talks, when supposedly the beginning of an agreement to agree, and then they were supposed to finalize it within 6 months, and then in 6 months they delay it another 4, 5, 6 months, and then later they have to delay it again, and it's in further delay. And all of this delay only works to allow what the former advisor to the president of Iran was saying on live Syrian television just days after the Geneva talks, that we're working rapidly, we're working feverishly on this uranium we have hidden underground that's at a much higher percentage than that which you know about and we told you about, that we agreed we'd placate you and lower that by 20%. Well, yeah, we'll do that just to keep you thrown off guard. And as former United States Secretary of State George Shultz, and my apologies, and thank you very much to those of you who wrote me and explained that last night I mentioned George Shultz as by name correctly one time, and then the other times I was calling him William Shultz. And as I explained to those who let me know I made that mistake, I had William Shultz on my mind, who was one of my instructors at Ambassador College in Pasadena, California, for our Western Civilization class. And in that class, every day just about every class, he would say, democracy is the only form of government which has within itself its own seed of destruction. I went to him one time and asked him, Mr. Shultz, what do you mean by that? What does that mean exactly? He said, Stephen, you are young enough that you may see this happen during your lifetime. He says, one day you'll know exactly what I'm saying. And friends, it's today and in these past few months that, as I recall my instructor saying that to us in the class, that I'm saying, yeah, now I see what he was talking about. And what a great understanding he had. And for a long time, I couldn't remember my instructor's name, but I could sure remember those words. Democracy is the only form of government that has within itself its own seed of destruction for itself. And he varied the way he say that sometimes, but he was saying it has within itself its own inherent seed of its own destruction, built right into democracy. And I finally been able, now, Mr. Shultz, I can see and understand that. And when I finally remembered Mr. Shultz's name, William Shultz, I made an effort to lock his name into my mind. So last night when I was speaking about the former United States Secretary of State, George Shultz, who was in office between 1982 and 1989, a couple times because I had cemented recently my former college instructor for Western Civ in my brain. So I made such an effort to get his name firmly in my mind so I wouldn't forget it again, William Schultz, that I said my college instructor's name, William Schultz, when I should have been saying George Schultz last night. What did George Schultz say in November of 2013 in an interview he did around the time of the Geneva talks? I believe that interview also was right after the Geneva talks. BBC interviewed him, and he said, negotiating with Iran is a mistake. He says they'll smile at you, send you on your way, and cut your throat. Now, that's a former statesman, the elderly. I think today, now he's maybe 94 years old. He was saying this in November 2013 when he was 92, 93 years old. Elderly, senior man with experience in dealing with Iran during some of the rough days between 1982 and 1989. And he's telling us, if we would listen to him, he's telling us, you're foolish to try to deal with them. They'll smile at you, send you on your way, and cut your throat. That's the former United States Secretary of State, George Shultz. He's got no office to run for, no political reason to be spinning things one way or another. He's just telling it like it is. And yet, who's listening? Well, thank you, Mr. George Shultz. I was listening to you. I heard you. And it saddens me that those in government today just aren't hearing you. They think like the younger advisors to King Solomon, that they can, or King Solomon's son, Rehoboam, that he can just do what he pleases and listen to his young peers. What happened? He lost the 10 tribes when Jeroboam came to him, and then God set Jeroboam up to be the leader over those 10 tribes as they moved up to Samaria from Jerusalem. And then because those 10 tribes under Jeroboam became foolish when Jeroboam was afraid they'd go back to Rehoboam, and so he changed the feast days from the 7th month to the 8th month, and God let them go into captivity, and they became lost until these latter days. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the history of the 10 tribes who now are in places around the world. Reuben, the firstborn son, is modern-day France, and Joseph, his 2 sons, Ephraim, UK, Manasseh, United States. And the rest of the tribes, friends, I got a slide right here. We'll put it up real quickly. This shows you where all of the 12 tribes are. You can take a quick look at that while I figure out where we're going to go next. I got one more story I'm going to cover tonight. I plan to keep it short because of our new camera, just in case we had problems with the new camera. And I didn't want to take away from the... today is kind of a lull day in a certain way with the news because of Mr. Netanyahu being in Washington already, having a warm-up, ease the tensions type of day and event, thankfully, where he was well received. And thanks to those who did that. I appreciate seeing that because of the love that I have for my brothers in the modern-day nation of Israel in the Middle East. Thank you. Thank you very much to those of you who put on today's event. And thank you, Mr. Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. Thank you for your kind words to your brethren here in the United States. And your kind words, although quite undeserved, to the leader, to the current leader of this nation. Thank you very much. It's comforting. And today, I say, it's kind of a lull because we'll see how things go tomorrow. We'll see how things go after that. And frankly, friends, what I perceive is that anything that lulls or prevents or inhibits or prohibits Israel from having been able to take action against what it sees happening in Iran, with them continuing to develop that nuclear power, which they intend to make into a bomb, as the former advisor to the president of Iran said in November after the Geneva talks started, live on that Syrian television program. Go back, take a look at that in our archive for November 2013. Half-hour program. I played the whole thing, and we've got that recording, and so it just amazes me that nobody in the government here in the United States is paying attention to that when they're making the former advisor to the president of Iran is laughing at us, making a laughing stock at us. After they blow us up, they'll really have their laugh. And God will allow, most likely not them, Europe will intervene first. God will allow the people he's always used to punish his people, the Assyrians. God uses the Assyrians to punish Israel when they disobey, when they misbehave. As presently, friends, the reason why we've got such a tension-filled, troublesome situation in the United States is because, not just because of one man or one leader, it is because the majority of the people are laxed into sin, into disobedience to our Creator in the ways that God explains in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, where he says in the first part of each of those two blessing and cursing chapters, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, he begins by saying, if you diligently hearken to the voice of the Eternal and walk in my statutes and keep my commands, and he enumerates the blessings he'll give us, one after another. Rain in due season. Power over your enemies such that 5 of you will chase 100. And 100 of you will put 10,000 of your enemy to flight. He says, nationally, I'll make you the head, not the tail. I'll make you the lender, not the borrower. That speaks volumes there, because when you read the last half of those two chapters, Leviticus 28, I said it backwards, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, the two blessing and cursing chapters, when you read the last half of each of those two chapters, you see where God says, but if you don't obey me, if you don't hearken to my voice, if you don't walk in my statutes, if you don't keep my commands, then just the opposite of those blessings, curses. And then I'll multiply those curses 7 times over. You'll be the borrower, not the lender. That speaks volumes, doesn't it? I mean, look at the situation with the United States now. Does that tell you we're receiving blessings from God, or we're under the curses of God? With the kind of debt the United States has, do I need to explain it, friends? Duh. That should tell us. My goodness, we're a great borrower. God says when you don't obey, that's one of the curses for people individually and as a nation collectively together. And then he says, if you still don't obey me after I punish you 7 times over, I will break the pride of your power. Look at what is happening to the pride of the power of the United States. Countries are laughing at us now. They don't respect us. Saudi Arabia is forming its own army because where it used to be able to depend on the United States, it's saying, hey, United States, you're too slack. You're not dealing with IS. They're gaining ground. And even though it's little by little, they're entrenching in little by little in a way that's going to be immovable. And they're making headway toward putting a caliphate in power that'll be practically unstoppable, except that another thing that's developing in news lately is that Europe is now talking about the third element that Mr. Herbert Armstrong explained would be the 3 things needed for Europe to fully come together. One was an economic union. That's already been underway since around 2000 with the euro, and in spite of its struggles, that single currency it's in there. And it's really just the mark with a new name to it, and a lot of other countries that are called part of the Eurozone have been willing to exchanged their national currency for this newly named mark, the euro. You know, mark, German government money. Headquarters for the European Central Bank right there in Frankfurt, Germany, the very city in which the Emperor's Hall is located, where the kings of the Holy Roman Empire are crowned by the Pope. Duh! I mean, this all falls together with what's prophesied to happen with a seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire coming, where 10 nations or regions, 5 from the east, 5 from the west of the Roman Empire, the divided Roman Empire, east Constantinople, west Rome, united for a while, even though they won't get along like miry clay, common clay, and iron don't mix. The great image of Daniel 2, the feet and the toes are depicted as clay and iron, as two substances that won't adhere together except during some kind of calamity, some kind of event, that climaxes to cause them to push together, like the IS, Iran, coming really strongly on with nuclear power, the situation in the Ukraine and Russia. All of that's pushing Europe, United Europe, to go for the third element Mr. Armstrong explained. I mentioned the economic union. The second thing he mentioned was a political union. Well, that's been well-forming since that treaty that has got now some 27 members of it, and eventually they'll redefine that. They'll reshape it. They'll boundarize it so that it's 10 new bordered countries, or 10 nations or countries in some way, 10 regions, 5 from the east, 5 from the west. And the third element Mr. Armstrong explained that would be needed for it to really come together, the way it's going to go into having a seventh and final head that will commence World War III, will be a military union. That'll be and that will start, once that comes together and that seventh head is appointed, that will start the Great Tribulation, which is the time when World War III will commence. It's a time when there will be a great martyrdom of God's saints. That'll be a time of Philadelphia being flown by God to the wilderness just east of the waterway between the Dead Sea and Lake Tiberias, in an area that Daniel 11, verses 40, 41, 42 describe as a triangulation of safety from which the beast power has no effect. He doesn't reach into there. He reaches the rest of the whole world, but not that area, an area where Petra is located. And whether it be Petra or somewhere else around it, that whole area will be an area of safety to which God says he will fly his end-time people of the Philadelphia era. Some of you understand that. I'm not going to explain it any further than what I just said. It'll also be the time of the two witnesses doing their big testimony around the world. We don't know who they're going to be yet, but they will be given a certain power from God. And there will also be a certain power of miracles given to the false prophet. And so only those who understand will know who's who in the beginning of this thing. Then it'll become very obvious as time goes on. But once it becomes very obvious, those who are accounted worthy to escape, as Christ talks about in Luke 21, verse 36, where he tells us to watch the events that relate to the first of Revelation 6 and pray about them. And then he holds out a promise that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things. All these things include, after the first 4 seals, the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation. And that's what he's talking about when he says, when you be accounted worthy to escape these things to come. And that's the next major thing to happen in prophecy. I'm just kind of summarizing. I got one more story that relates to what the UK is doing right now, and how there's a certain, everybody is trying to win some favor with China except the United States. And, you know, we'll talk about that another time. Let's go to this next story. The Duke of Cambridge, the UK. I got a scripture I'm going to come back to, and we're going to show this video first. The Duke of Cambridge has met Chinese President Xi Jinping as the prince begins the highest profile UK royal visit to China in nearly 30 years. They talked in Beijing's Great Hall of the People, where the president himself met with William and praised the royal family's past interest in China. Peter Hunt has this report from Beijing. This will be our last story for tonight, friends.
Well, I think most strikingly, he's met the president. I mean, if there was any problem with the relationship between Britain and China, he could have been met by a lesser official. And the president was full of praise for what he said were the British royal family's role globally, and about their role, he said, they played in fostering links between the UK and China. And during that meeting, Prince William spoke about how it had long been a desire of his to come to this country, and it's a desire that he's now obviously fulfilling. And in part of his visit here, he went to the Forbidden City, the iconic building, the former home of the imperial royal family here in China.
Okay, friends, and that's it for this Monday evening edition of Nightcast. We're looking to see how things will go tomorrow. We'll report on it with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking tomorrow in Congress in the United States. Thanks for joining me tonight. God willing, and the creek don't rise, friends. We'll be back here on Nightcast. We'll be back here on Nightcast tomorrow night, Tuesday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.